Dr. Meara, the International Agency for Research on Cancer of the World Health Organization recently classified radio frequencies as a possible Group 2B human carcinogen. Do you think that current guidelines on safe exposure levels also should be reclassified?
I mean, the IARC process is part of an ongoing process that looks at all sorts of potential hazards, and they have a very systematic approach for getting the evidence together and coming up with their views. And in 2011 they considered radio frequency radio waves, and they had a group of experts with a very wide range of opinions and positions, including authors of the bioinitiative reports. And the resulting bottom line was, as you said, that radio frequencies were graded as a possible carcinogen. That is by far from the strongest classification. There is also probable and certain carcinogen. Amongst the probable carcinogens is shift working. Amongst certain carcinogens is alcoholic drinks. And besides radio waves, other agents with this 2B classification are petrol car exhaust, surgical implants, and coffee.
Excuse me, 10 cups of coffee per day.
Sorry, could I just have
and coffee. And actually, Mr. Mitcham makes a good point. All that the IARC classification does is says whether something could be a carcinogen or not. It actually doesn't go into risk and dose. And there's another process to produce things called environmental health criteria, which actually look at the public health implications, because it's all very well if something's a carcinogen but is only going to affect one person every million years, you don't have to do much about it, and vice versa. So that environmental health criterion process is currently underway. Obviously, in terms of protecting the public, each classification has to be considered on its own merits, and you can't wait until you've got the environmental health criteria once you've got some data. However, a proportionate response, we feel, to a 2B classification is to inform the public, to advise about possible precautionary measures, particularly for the highest exposures, which would be mobile phones in this case, and for the most at-risk groups, which might be children in this case. And the UK did this as far back as 2000, after the Stewart report, by its advice to users of mobile phones to limit their, the children's use of phones. I mean, smart meter exposures, as we've explained, are much lower than those from mobile phones, thousands of times lower, and therefore they don't merit the precautionary advice, because as Mr. Mitcham was sort of hinting, you know, you go for the high risk activities.
So, in answering the question, should current guidelines on safe exposure levels also be reclassified? Just for the sake of clarity and brevity, what is your answer?
No. Sorry, I gave a rather long answer, if that's all you want.
Dr. Swanson, the bioinitiative report concluded that bioeffects can occur from just minutes of exposure to mobile phone masts, Wi-Fi and wireless utility smart meters that produce whole body exposure. How do you understand the bioinitiative report has been received within the academic community? Do you know whether it's been peer reviewed, and if so, what other scientists have made of it?
The bioinitiative conclusions are clearly out of line with what one could call the mainstream view or the international consensus. That has been recognised by other scientists in commenting on bioinitiative. The specific question, has it been peer-reviewed? I believe it was initially published in non-peer-reviewed form, but subsequently the individual chapters have been published in peer-reviewed journals. I think the interesting question is, why did the bioinitiative enterprise result in conclusions so different from those reached by each of the other bodies who have looked at this subject? And I think that relates to my earlier comment about the way in which science is done, this business of dispassionately looking at the totality of evidence, weighing the strength of individual pieces of evidence, and through a multidisciplinary weight of evidence process reaching an overall conclusion. And I think my view, certainly, and that is the institution I'm representing, and I think of many other scientists, is that bioinitiative did not perform that sort of dispassionate weight of evidence approach.
Let me be clear. as to exactly what you're accusing them of, because some of these are scientists in their own right.
Yes.
We're talking about scientists, the World Foundation for Natural Sciences. We're talking about Dr. Elizabeth Evans. So I just want to be clear what you're accusing them of doing. Are you saying that they deliberately set out to find evidence for a proposition that they wished to prove?
I would not say they deliberately set out to find such a conclusion. I would say that the way in which that exercise came about and the way in which it was structured created perhaps a disposition to find such a conclusion.
And why would they have any desire to engage upon such false practice?
I'm just hesitating over the word false practice, but let me... Yeah.
Well, you're saying that the practice is out of line with normal scientific procedure, and what I'm asking you is, was it ill motivation, or was it by some flaw in the way in which they conducted their research? And if it's because of the latter, then what was the flaw in the way in which they conducted their research?
Bioinitiative, as I understand it, came about because there was a group of people who felt that the prevailing international consensus was not a true consensus, not a fair reflection of the science. And I do not in any way impugn the individual beliefs of those scientists who reached that conclusion and then came together to produce a report which would put a different viewpoint and, in their view, the correct viewpoint. In the scientific endeavour, there is room for all viewpoints, and it's often very helpful to have viewpoints from outside whatever the prevailing mainstream consensus is, in order to prompt those of us more within the consensus to be challenged. Are we considering all the right issues? Are there things we've overlooked? So I do not in any way dispute the right of the individuals to hold those views, or indeed to publish those views, but I'm trying to understand how a group of people who, broadly speaking, held those views came together with a purpose of challenging the orthodoxy, and I think that is what lies behind how they came to a rather different view to the mainstream view.
Okay, the advisory group on non-ionising radiation, when it stated that they had found little or no evidence linking symptoms that the bioinitiative report had linked with exposure to RFs and EMS, did they have full access to the information that the bioinitiative report had prepared?
Broadly speaking, yes. There will always be individual studies that one group happened to have picked up and another group happened not to have picked up. But I believe such individual studies don't make a very material difference to the overall view. And I think essentially each of the groups, the International Commission, the Public Health England in the UK and Bioinitiative, were drawing on the same evidence base.